Cheers, guys. I am Epix911. It is Tuesday, and this is VR Roundup, episode 19. Just quick summary of tonight's show, guys. We are going to talk about updates to games Raw Data and Payday 2 VR Beta. We're going to talk about the devs behind the VR experience Everest and efforts to create their first virtual reality game. That should be interesting. We're also going to get a couple of updates to head-mounted displays, the Pico Goblin, the LG Steam VR headset as well. And then end things off with an editorial. I want to give some kind of props to the companies that have been supporting virtual reality as opposed to, the airtime usually going to companies that don't or do so poorly. And then talk about performance, how important it is in the light of companies like Unity and Unreal, or Epic rather, with their Unreal Engine, the work that they're doing to optimize virtual reality versus, stuff like Fallout 4, which I find a great game, but we're going to talk about the heavy use of reprojection and the need to streamline and optimize virtual reality before we jump headfirst into 4K and 8K tech. And with that said, guys, let's start with the first story. Raw Data, Survios's virtual reality title, added again with another free update. This time, a PvP hostile takeover map and game mode called Intercept. According to the official statement, it's going to see you and other PvPs fight it out as Syndicate is basically hacking its way into Reactor 4 data chambers. Intercept available to all owners of the game, no cost for that. If you don't have Raw Data, and guys, I love it just as a single player experience. I've said that way too many times. Never even played multiplayer on it, but I can highly recommend the title. 20% off currently. It's $39.99 US price. Then we've got the Pico Goblin launching this week, $40 off its price tag, coming in at $229 US on Amazon. It's a 3 degree of freedom headset, pretty much like Gear VR and Google Daydream. In fact, its controller, essentially a clone of the controller those two are using, runs its own operating system, and it's going to launch with a fair amount of apps and games. I'm going to say fair amount, guys, because of the three, it's got the weakest catalog and probably isn't going to get as much traction this generation as those other two devices. Not saying don't purchase it, just urging you to make an informed decision before you plunk your hard-earned bucks down on a mobile platform. Next up, Solfar Studios. Those are the developers behind the impressive Everest VR virtual reality experience. They're working on a game called In Death. So that's their first official virtual reality game. I consider Everest VR more an experience. It's going to be a roguelike bow shooter that promises procedurally generated crawling for loot and more, according to them. They're dubbing it a medieval roguelite shooter set in a godless afterlife. It's going to be available for both Rift and Vive on the Steam VR platform. According to the official announcement, you're going to battle through procedurally generated levels and dungeons in intense ranged combat coupled with a unique locomotion system that is perfectly attuned to your fighting style. Now, color me a bit of a skeptic here, but that last bit almost sounds like they're trying to market teleportation only as being a fantastic thing. Hopefully not the case. Hopefully there is smooth locomotion options as well. We'll find out when it launches. And then Payday 2 VR Beta also receiving an update, several levels. The official statement reading, "We're happy to see how well our latest addition to CrimeNet, the Reservoir Dogs heist, has been received. We saw a few issues reported on the forums, and we quickly got to work on ironing out the wrinkles. We also bring an update to the VR beta today. Jump in and have a blast, literally, with some grenade launchers and a few new levels. We are adding the new level here as well so that you can do some classical heisting with modern technology. Finally, we're also including some updated animations for grenade launchers, shotguns, and revolvers. It's not the only thing, it's not in the official announcement, but in addition to this new content, Overkill is going to be bringing smooth locomotion. They're dubbing it direct movement. Seems to be not pure smooth locomotion, more of a hybrid, because players can now choose to play with either dash plus direct or dash only. Well, the only word in a long time that we're getting on the LG Steam VR headset is an old patent that has surfaced. It's a drawing and some details on this patent from early 2016. They show an integrated set of headphones. Who knows how relevant this still is, or even if this device is still coming to market. Like I said, it's been very quiet on the LG front. I guess we'll find out in 2018 if it's still moving ahead. And just want to end things, guys, with a quick editorial talking about some of the companies as opposed to ones who haven't been supporting VR. The ones who probably don't get enough accolades, who from day one, in fact, before the virtual reality solutions, the big three launched, etc., they were supporting it even ahead of that. And it's easy to kind of get caught up talking about negative things, right? Companies that aren't supporting virtual reality that we maybe wish they would. Take a company like Electronic Arts, for example. And you know what? My counter to that would be, guys, it's probably a good thing that they don't have their hands in VR at this time. They are in enough of a mess, EA is, with all of these microtransactions and ramming them into game projects that honestly, personally me, you know what? If it's going to take you a couple of years to get to VR, don't rush it on my account, guys. Take your time. But for every Electronic Arts, we've got companies like Epic with their Unreal Engine, or the folks at Unity with the Unity platform, both of whom have been providing frequent updates, resources, forums, all kinds of tools, development, documentation for developers. And of course, a lot of those developers end up being indie companies. But at least they have access, thanks to those two, to not just being able to program for virtual reality, but provide optimizations, or rather have access to optimizations, whether it's reprojection, which can get abused, and we'll talk about that in a few, or just tools to make the virtual reality, the final experience, be a lot better for us end users. That kind of ties into the next thing I wanted to talk about, and the last thing, and that is where we are at with virtual reality technology. I know we're kind of always hinting, right? What's over the next hill? 4K, 8K. We get into these polls and debates. Is it going to be 5 years for 4K or 10 or 8K? We still have enough issues with 1080p. Never mind 4K and 8K. And that was really driven home to me, guys, playing Fallout 4. Once I got to Diamond City, the reprojection was out of control. Now, I'm not somebody who's susceptible and really notices reprojection kicking in. I just don't get motion sickness, and I'll notice a dead pixel, but for some reason, I'm just not that sensitive to reprojection. So I was able to play it, and enjoy it. What I'm referring to is the fact that it has to kick into it at all. Yes, it's a slightly modified, newer engine than the one that powered Skyrim, but essentially, it's an almost decade-old engine that Bethesda is using for Fallout, and one that is almost a decade old that they're using for Skyrim, because work on that engine started even as Oblivion had just been on the market for its first and second year. Clearly, the optimization for VR, that hard work that companies like Unity are throwing into theirs, or Epic throwing into Unreal Engine, it's not there for Fallout 4. And the proof is in the obscene amount of reprojection that gets called into effect playing that game. And I urge anybody who, isn't sure of it to just run the frame display while you play. And an easy way to do that is in Steam VR, just have it warn you in your head-mounted display how the performance is and when reprojection gets kicked into effect. And you can do that a couple of different ways. You can have that warning come up and still rely on reprojection to keep it fairly smooth, or disable it completely. But I tell you guys, Diamond City, for example, is just a juddery mess. Now, I bring that up not to brag about my system, but again, to just emphasize the importance of optimizing code and streamlining before we get too enthusiastic about 4K and 8K. Research and development should never stop, and I'm not claiming for a second it should, just that we need to optimize along the way, not just code to code and create bloated messes. So for Fallout 4, for example, it would probably be a lot more comforting to me and others, especially devs, if a title like that on a 1080, sure, I don't have a 1080 Ti, guys, but I've got an i7, 16 gigs of RAM, and an EVGA 1080 Founders Edition. It's not a slouch of a system. Neither is it a beast top of the line, but it's up there. And yet, reprojection massively heavy. Yes, it's got to do stereoscopic rendering. I understand that. But when you can run the game with everything cranked at triple V-synced frame rate, you've got the processing power to spare to run that at 90 frames per second in virtual reality. That is essentially the issue I have with it, and that has to do with not having optimized code for virtual reality. Hopefully, as an exercise, as they're creating the Skyrim VRs and the Fallout VRs, Bethesda, like Epic, like Unity, is optimizing and learning techniques to be able to render displays quicker, etc. So there you go, guys. Let me know your thoughts on that. And like I said, I'm enjoying the hell out of Fallout 4. I still enjoy it. I just want to be real in terms of the performance. Guys, that is it for this episode of VR Roundup. Catch you guys again for the best day of the week, Gaming Friday, in a few days. As always, guys, cheers.